The morning alarm echoed through the bridge of the TDS Defender as Captain Minji Park sipped her coffee and watched the sunrise over New Busan. The colony world looked peaceful from orbit, with golden wheat fields stretching to the horizon and small towns dotted across the landscape like scattered jewels. "Another quiet morning in paradise," said Lieutenant Commander Sung-ho, her second in command. He joined her at the observation deck, holding his own steaming cup. Minji smiled. "Don't jinx it, we've had 3 weeks of peace. That's practically a record out here in the Rim territories." She checked her watch. In 2 hours, her son Jinwoo would be getting ready for school down on the surface. At 8 years old, he was already showing signs of the same stubborn determination that had made her a decorated officer in the Terran Defense Corps. Yesterday, he had called her on the comm to proudly announce he had scored highest in his math test. "Mom, when you come home next week, can we go fishing at Mirror Lake?" he had asked, his face bright with excitement on the video screen. "Of course, Tiger Cub," she had replied, using the nickname she had given him since he was a baby. "We'll catch the biggest fish in the lake." Now, watching the peaceful world below, Minji allowed herself to imagine that fishing trip. Maybe she could finally teach Jinwoo how to pilot the shuttle. He was getting old enough, and his coordination was excellent for his age. The piece shattered at 847 hours. "Captain, I'm reading massive hyperspace signatures," called Ensign Hana from the sensor station. "Multiple contacts bearing 27 Mark IV. They're big, ma'am." Minji was already moving toward her command chair before the words finished leaving the young officer's mouth. "How many?" 12? No, 15 contacts. Keth design signatures. They're coming in fast and hot." The coffee cup slipped from Minji's hand and shattered on the deck. The Keth Dominion hadn't been seen in this sector for over a year. Their reptilian empire usually stayed closer to the galactic core, where the rich worlds provided better targets for their slave raids. "Red alert. All hands to battle stations," Minji ordered. "Signal the fleet. Form up in defensive pattern Delta 7. Protect the colony at all costs." The bridge erupted into controlled chaos as her crew prepared for battle. The Defender was a good ship, and her small fleet of 6 vessels had successfully defended New Busan from pirates and raiders for 3 years. But 15 Keth warships was more than they had ever faced. "Captain, incoming transmission from the lead Keth vessel," reported Communications Officer Jiwon. On screen, the view screen flickered to life, showing the scaled face of a Keth commander. His yellow eyes gleamed with cold intelligence, and his forked tongue flicked out as he spoke in accented standard. "Human Commander, I am War Leader Skatar of the Keth Dominion. You will stand down your vessels and allow us to harvest what we require from your colony. Resistance will only increase the casualties." Minji stood slowly, her hands clenched into fists. "This is Captain Park of the Terran Defense Corps. New Busan is under our protection. Turn around and leave our space or we will destroy you." The Keth commander made a sound that might have been laughter. "Your 6 small ships against our fleet? You amuse me, human. We come for specific cargo. Young humans adapt best to new environments. They make the most valuable servants." The words hit Minji like a physical blow. "Children. They were after the children. Over my dead body," she whispered. "That can be arranged," Sikatar replied, and cut the transmission. "All ships, this is Captain Park," Minji announced over the fleet comm. "They're targeting the children. We stop them here, or we stop them never. For New Busan, for our families, attack." The battle was fierce and desperate. Minji's smaller, faster ships darted between the massive Keth cruisers like angry wasps, striking at engines and weapon systems before dancing away from return fire. The human crews fought with the fury of parents protecting their young, pushing their ships beyond safe limits. For 30 minutes it seemed they might actually win. 3 Keth ships limped away with heavy damage and another exploded in a brilliant fireball that lit up the space around New Busan. Then the cloaked ships revealed themselves. "Captain, I'm reading 4 more Keth vessels," Hana called out, her voice tight with fear. They were hidden behind the moon. They're moving toward the planet's surface. Minji felt her heart stop. The orbital battle had been a distraction. While her fleet fought the main force, smaller Keth ships had used new cloaking technology to slip past their defenses. "Sung-ho, take command of the fleet. Continue the engagement." I'm taking the Defender down to the surface. Captain, if we split our forces now, those ships are heading for the colony. My son is down there. She turned to face her second in command, and he saw something in her eyes that made him step back. I'm going to get him. But even pushing the Defender's engines past the red line, Minji was too late. By the time she reached the colony's main settlement, smoke was rising from dozens of buildings. Emergency sirens wailed across the town as colonists ran through the streets, some carrying wounded, others searching frantically for missing family members. Minji landed the shuttle near Jinwoo's school and ran toward the building, her service, pistol drawn. The school's front doors hung open, twisted metal that had been blasted apart by alien weapons. Inside, she found chaos. Desks overturned, windows shattered, children's artwork scattered across the floor like broken dreams. In the main classroom, she found Jinwoo's teacher, Mrs. Yoon-hee, sitting against the wall with tears streaming down her face. Captain Park, the older woman whispered. I'm so sorry. I tried to protect them. I tried to fight. But there were too many. Where is Jinwoo? Minji's voice was barely a whisper. They took them. All of them. 847 children. Mrs. Yoon-hee held up a torn piece of blue fabric. This was all I could save. Minji recognized the material immediately. It was from Jinwoo's favorite shirt, the one with the tiger on the front that he had worn to school that morning. She took the fabric with trembling hands and sank to her knees among the debris of her son's classroom. Around her, the sounds of the devastated colony continued. Emergency vehicles, crying parents, the distant rumble of the continuing space battle above. But all Minji could hear was the echo of her son's voice from their last conversation. When you come home next week, can we go fishing at Mirror Lake? She pressed the torn fabric to her chest and closed her eyes. When she opened them again, something had changed. The tears were gone, replaced by something cold and hard as winter steel. Standing slowly, Minji walked to the shattered window and looked up at the stars where the Keith fleet was already retreating into hyperspace. Somewhere out there, her son was aboard one of those ships, scared and alone, and calling for his mother. She spoke quietly, but her words carried the weight of an oath that would echo across the galaxy. They took my tiger cub. Now I hunt. 6 months had passed since the raid on New Busan, and Captain Minji Park no longer existed. The woman who now sat in the captain's chair of the modified stealth corvette Tiger's Claw was someone different, harder, colder, deadlier. The ship itself reflected its owner's transformation. Where once the Defender had been painted in the clean white and blue of the Terran Defense Corps, the Tiger's Claw was matte black with sensor-absorbing coating. Its weapons had been upgraded with military-grade systems that Minji had acquired through contacts who asked no questions. The cargo hold had been converted into holding cells for prisoners who might have information about her son. Another Keth supply convoy just dropped out of hyperspace, reported Deho Kim from the sensor station. The former intelligence operative had joined Minji's crew 3 months ago after his own daughter had been taken in a raid on the mining colony of New Seoul. His skills in gathering information had proven invaluable in tracking Keth slave routes. How many ships? Minji asked, checking the charge on her pulse rifle. 3 transport vessels, 2 escort frigates. Standard pattern for moving cargo through the outer rim. Minji nodded. Over the past months, she had learned the Keth patterns. Well, the reptilian aliens moved their stolen humans along established routes, transferring them at hidden stations before selling them to the highest bidders. Each convoy she intercepted brought her closer to finding Jinwoo. "Hiran, are the jammers ready?" Minji called to the engine room. "Signal scramblers are online," replied Hiran Lee, the brilliant young engineer who had designed most of the Tigers. Claw's modifications. Her parents had been enslaved when she was 12, and she had spent years planning revenge before Minji found her working as a mechanic on a frontier station. They won't be able to call for help. The attack was swift and precise. The Tiger's Claw emerged from behind an asteroid, its weapons targeting the escort ship's engines, rather than destroying them completely. Minji had learned that dead aliens couldn't provide information about missing children. Within minutes, both Keth frigates were crippled and drifting. The transport ships, defenseless without their escorts, surrendered immediately. Minji and her team boarded the lead transport wearing full combat armor. The Keith crew cowered as she walked through their ship, her helmet's external speakers making her voice sound mechanical and terrifying. "Where are the children from New Busan?" she demanded of the transport captain, a scarred Keth veteran whose yellow eyes darted nervously between her and his crew. "I know nothing of specific cargo," the alien hissed. "We transport what we are told to transport." Minji raised her pulse rifle and aimed it at his head. Wrong answer. The Keth captain's scales rippled with fear. Over the months, word had spread through the criminal networks about the human female who hunted their kind. They called her the Ghost Captain, the one who appeared without warning and left no survivors who crossed her. "Wait," the captain said quickly. "There was a special shipment, young humans, high-value cargo. They were transferred at Korvash Station 2 months ago." "Transferred to whom?" "The flesh merchants. They run the big auctions in the Andorian cluster. That is all I know, I swear by the burning sands of Keth Prime." Minji lowered her weapon slightly. "How many children?" "I do not count cargo, but the manifest said nearly 900 young humans from various raids. 900. The number included not just the children from New Busan, but victims from other colonies as well." Minji felt the familiar cold rage building in her chest. She turned to leave, then stopped. "Captain." "Yes?" "Tell your people what you saw here today. Tell them the Ghost Captain is hunting. Tell them that every human child in chains brings her closer to finding what she seeks. And when she finds it..." Minji's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow sounded more threatening than a shout. "Tell them that the hunt will become a war." Back aboard the Tiger's Claw, Minji met with her crew in the small briefing room. Daeho had downloaded the transport's navigation data, while Hyeron worked on analyzing the ship's communication logs. "The Andorian cluster is deep in hostile territory," Daeho said, pointing to the star chart. "At least 12 different criminal organizations operate there. Getting in will be difficult. Getting out alive will be harder." "What about official channels?" asked Hyeron. "The Terran government has been making noise about increased anti-slavery operations." Minji shook her head. "Politicians move too slowly. By the time they organize a task force and negotiate with local authorities, the children will be sold and scattered across the galaxy. We go alone. The three of us against an entire criminal empire?" Daeho raised an eyebrow. "Not just us." Minji activated the ship's communication system. "I've been in contact with other families, other parents whose children were taken. Some of them have resources, skills, ships." Over the next hour, Minji's contacts joined the conversation via encrypted channels. There was Captain Sunho Nam, whose cargo freighter had been converted into a rescue vessel after his twin sons were abducted. Engineer Kyung Jun, who had escaped slavery herself and now helped other survivors. Dr. Miran Seo, who provided medical care for rescued victims and had been documenting the full scope of the slave trade. "The situation is worse than we thought," Dr. Seo reported. "My sources indicate that thousands of humans are processed through the Andorian cluster every year. The flesh merchants have connections with criminal organizations across multiple sectors." "Then we burn it all down," Minji said simply. "Captain Park," Captain Nam's voice carried a note of concern, "what you're talking about isn't a rescue mission. It's a war." "Good." Minji's reflection stared back at her from the dark viewport, and for a moment she barely recognized herself. The soft-spoken mother who had once read bedtime stories to Jinwoo was gone, replaced by something that made hardened criminals wake up screaming. They started this war when they took our children. Now they get to see how it ends. The meeting continued for another hour as they planned their approach to the Andorian cluster. Intelligence gathering, supply routes, potential allies, among other enslaved species. It was complex work that required patience and careful coordination. But as Minji sat alone in her quarters afterward, holding the torn piece of Jinwoo's shirt that she carried everywhere, the planning felt secondary to the burning need for action. Somewhere in the darkness between the stars, her son was waiting for her to bring him home. She activated her personal log and spoke quietly to the recording device. Day 183. The trail leads to Corvash Prime. The flesh. Merchants think they're safe behind their armies of hired killers and corrupt officials. They're wrong. I'm coming for my tiger cub, and nothing in this galaxy will stop me. Outside her viewport, the stars seemed to pulse with promise and threat. The hunt was far from over. Corvash Prime looked like hell from orbit. The planet's surface was covered in sprawling cities that glowed with neon lights and industrial fires. Massive ships came and went from orbital platforms, carrying cargo that Minji preferred not to think about too carefully. This was where civilized space ended and the real darkness began. Sensors are picking up heavy traffic around the main continent, reported Deho from his station. Looks like auction day is approaching. Minji stared at the view screen, watching the flow of ships around the criminal world. Somewhere down there, children who should have been safe in their beds were being prepared for sale like livestock. The thought made her hands shake with rage. "Any word from our contact?" she asked. Taewon Cho confirmed the meeting, said Hyerin. Dock 17, Lower City. He says he has information about the new Busan children, but it won't be cheap. The information broker had been recommended by Captain Nam, who had dealt with him before. Cho was human, but he had spent so many years in the criminal underworld that some people wondered if he remembered which side he was supposed to be on. "I don't like meeting contacts on their home ground," Deho muttered. "Too many ways for this to go wrong." "Everything about this mission can go wrong," Minji replied. "We do it anyway." They landed the Tiger's Claw in a public dock surrounded by dozens of other questionable vessels. Pirates, smugglers, and slave traders from across the galaxy conducted business in the shadow of massive loading cranes and fuel processing plants. The air tasted of recycled atmosphere and desperation. Minji had traded her military uniform for civilian clothes that wouldn't attract attention, but she kept her pulse pistol hidden under her jacket. Deho and Hyerin followed close behind as they made their way through the crowded streets of Lower City. The meeting place was a dingy bar called the Broken Chain. The name would have been ironic if it weren't so accurate. Most of the customers looked like they had been on both sides of slavery at various points in their lives. Taewon Cho sat in a corner booth, a thin man with nervous eyes who kept glancing at the exits. He had been handsome once, but years of living in places like Corvash Prime had worn him down to angles and shadows. "Captain Park," he said as Minji approached, "you look exactly like your reputation suggests. Cold as space and twice as dangerous." "You have information about my son?" Minji said, sliding into the booth across from him. "Talk. Straight to business." "I respect that." Cho activated a small privacy field generator that would prevent eavesdropping. "The children from New Busan were brought here 4 months ago. Premium stock, the flesh merchants called them. Young, healthy, already partially educated. Where are they now?" "That's where things get complicated." Cho leaned forward. "Most were sold in the regular auctions, standard slave markets, but 47 children were classified as special merchandise, too valuable for the public sales." Minji felt her heart stop. "Special how?" "Private auctions. Buyers who pay extra for specific requirements. Your son was among them." The words hit Minji like a physical blow. She had known that Jinwoo was in danger, but hearing it confirmed made the nightmare real in a new way. "Who bought him?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Vorthan nobility. House of Malthar, from what I heard. They like human children as personal servants and status symbols." Cho paused. "The payment for this information..." Minji reached across the table and grabbed his wrist. Her grip was strong enough to make him wince. "My son's location. Now. Vorthan Prime. The Imperial capital. He's in the palace complex, probably being trained for household service." Cho tried to pull his arm free. "But Captain, that world is a fortress. Even if you could get past the orbital defenses, the palace has thousands of guards." Minji released him and leaned back. Vorthan Prime was deep in enemy territory, one of the most heavily defended worlds in that sector. It would be suicide to attempt a rescue with her small crew. There's more, Cho continued, rubbing his wrist. The other children from your colony. I know where some of them are. Tell me. Processing station in the asteroid belt around Corvash. They're being prepared for the next major auction in 2 weeks, but the security there, he shook his head. It's not just guards. They have automated defense systems, trained killers from a dozen species, and enough firepower to hold off a military assault. Minji stood up slowly. How many children? At least 300, maybe more. The flesh merchants have been saving them up for a special sale. Apparently, young humans are becoming quite popular among the wealthy. As they left the bar, Minji's mind was already working through possibilities. Rescuing Jinwoo would require a massive operation that she couldn't mount alone. But 300 children in one location meant an opportunity to strike a real blow against the slave trade. We need to contact the others, she told Daeho as they walked back toward their ship. This is bigger than just finding Jinwoo. You're talking about attacking a fortress, he replied. Even with all our allies, we don't have enough firepower. Then we get more allies. Minji stopped walking and turned to face her crew. How many humans do you think are trapped on this world? Slaves who would fight for their freedom if someone gave them a chance? Hyeren's eyes widened as she understood. You want to start a slave revolt? I want to burn this place to the ground and free every human we can find, Minji said. The children in that processing station are just the beginning. Over the next week, they made contact with the hidden network of human slaves on Corvash Prime. The numbers were staggering. Thousands of humans worked in factories, mines, and service industries across the planet. Most had given up hope of ever seeing home again. But when word spread about the woman who had come to rescue the children, something changed. Whispered conversations in slave quarters, stolen weapons hidden in work sites. Plans passed through, coded messages in the meal halls. The key contact was Sunho Nam, not the ship captain but a different man who had been enslaved on Corvash Prime for 3 years. He looked older than his 30 years, with scars on his arms and the careful way of moving that marked someone who had learned to survive in hell. The processing station orbits on the dark side of asteroid KX-7, he explained during a secret meeting in an abandoned warehouse. Shift changes happen every 8 hours. Security is lighter during the night cycle. How many guards? Asked Daeho. Maybe 50 professional soldiers. But they also have automated turrets, shield generators, and a self-destruct system in case of revolt. Sunho paused. The children are kept in the lower levels. If the station explodes, they die first. Minji felt cold rage building in her chest. Even in death, the flesh merchants wanted to make sure their victims couldn't escape. What about the humans working there? She asked. Maintenance crews, food service, cleaning staff. Maybe 20 people total. Most of them have been there so long they've given up fighting. Sunho looked directly at Minji. But if they see someone from outside trying to help, they might remember what hope feels like. Captain Nam arrived with his converted freighter carrying weapons and supplies. Dr. Miran Seo brought medical equipment and volunteers trained in combat rescue. Other ships appeared in the outer system, each carrying parents and former slaves who were ready to fight. The plan was complex but brutal in its simplicity. Multiple simultaneous attacks on slave facilities across the planet, with the main assault focused on the asteroid processing station. The goal wasn't just rescue but to create so much chaos that the criminal organizations would lose control. The flesh merchants have grown comfortable, Minji explained to the assembled rescue teams. Via encrypted communication, they think humans are weak, compliant, broken. Tonight we show them what happens when you threaten our children. The attack began at midnight, Corvash prime time. Across the planet, human slaves rose up against their masters. Weapons caches were raided, security systems were sabotaged from within. The carefully ordered world of the criminal underworld dissolved into chaos. Minji led the assault on the asteroid station personally. The Tiger's Claw and 5 other ships punched through the outer defenses while former slaves inside the facility opened airlocks and disabled security systems. The battle was fierce but brief. The station's guards, most of them mercenaries who fought only for money, broke and ran when faced with humans who fought for their children's freedom. In the lower levels of the facility, Minji found them. Hundreds of human children ages 5 to 15, kept in conditions that made her stomach turn. They were thin, scared, and many didn't even remember their real names anymore. But they were alive. And now, they were free. As the rescue ships evacuated, the children, Minji stood in the station's command center and activated the facility's self-destruct system. The explosion would be visible from Corvash Prime's surface, a message to every slave trader in the galaxy. But even as she watched the station burn, Minji knew her real target was still out there. Somewhere on Vorthan Prime, Jinwoo was waiting for his mother to bring him home. The war had begun. 8 months after the raid on New Busan, the galaxy was on fire. News reports came in daily from across human space and beyond. Slave facilities attacked, transport convoys destroyed, criminal organizations finding their operations disrupted by coordinated strikes that seemed to come from nowhere. The aliens had started calling it the human storm, and Minji Park was at the center of it all. Reports from the Outer Rim show 17 successful rescue operations this week alone, said Dr. Miran Seo over the encrypted communication channel. We've freed over 2,000 humans from various facilities. Minji sat in the command center of her new flagship, the Liberation. The converted battlecruiser had been donated by a Terran Defense Corps captain, whose daughter had been rescued from Corvash Prime. Officially, the ship was listed as destroyed in a training accident. Unofficially, it was the mobile headquarters of the largest slave revolt in galactic history. What about intelligence on Vorthan Prime? Minji asked. That's where we have a problem, replied Captain Sunho Nam from his position near the Vorthan border. Their security has been increased dramatically since the attacks began. They know we're coming. The months of rescues had been successful, but they had also alerted the Vorthan Empire to the growing human resistance. Vorthan Prime now had triple the usual orbital defenses, and intelligence suggested they were preparing for a siege. There's something else, said a new voice on the channel. This is Kyung Jun reporting from inside Vorthan space. Minji leaned forward. Kyung Jun was a former slave who had escaped years earlier and now worked as a deep cover operative. Getting information from him was rare and dangerous. Go ahead, Jun. I've made contact with human slaves inside the Imperial Palace. Your son is there, but... His voice hesitated. Minji, they've been conditioning him. Psychological programming to make him loyal to his masters. The words hit Minji like a physical blow. She had known this was possible, but hearing it confirmed was different. Somewhere in the palace of her enemies, her 8-year-old son was being turned into a willing slave. How bad is it? She asked, her voice barely steady. He responds to a Vorthan name now. Kethmiran. He serves in the household of Lord Vektar, one of the most powerful nobles on the planet. But Minji, the slaves, I talked to say he still has moments. Times when he seems to remember something from before. Dr. Seo's voice cut in. The conditioning isn't perfect, especially with children. The younger they are, the more their core memories resist the programming. There's still hope. Minji closed her eyes and tried to picture Jinwoo as she last saw him, running toward the school bus with his backpack bouncing behind him. Now he was light years away, trained to serve aliens who had stolen his childhood. What do we need to liberate Vorthan Prime? She asked. The communication channel went quiet for a moment. Then, Captain Nam spoke carefully. Minji, what you're talking about isn't a rescue mission. It's a full-scale invasion of one of the most heavily defended worlds in the galaxy. We would need a fleet, thousands of troops, resources we don't have. Then we get them. How? Minji stood up and walked to the view screen, looking out at the stars. We've been fighting defensively, rescuing slaves, hitting isolated targets. But the galaxy is watching now. Every species knows about the human storm. Some of them are scared, others are impressed. A few might even be willing to help. Over the next weeks, Minji reached out to contacts across the galaxy, not just humans, but aliens who had been victims of the slave trade themselves. Species who had lost people to the flesh merchants and their associates. The response surprised everyone. The Zentari Confederation offered intelligence support. Their reptilian species had lost thousands of their own people to Vorthan slave raids over the centuries. The Melkrid Trade Union provided ships and supplies. As a species of traders, they had been hurt by the criminal organizations that disrupted legitimate commerce. Even some Terran Defense Corps units began offering unofficial support, weapons that were reported lost in training exercises. Officers who took extended leave to join the rescue operations. But the most surprising ally came from an unexpected source. "This is Admiral Hayon of the Vorthan Third Fleet," came the transmission that changed everything. "I wish to speak with Captain Park." The communication caused panic among Minji's staff. A Vorthan admiral wanted to talk. It had to be a trap. But when the transmission was accepted, the face that appeared on screen was not what anyone expected. Admiral Hayon was young for a Vorthan, with the pale blue skin and silver eyes of her species, but her expression was one of barely controlled rage. "Captain Park, I have been following your operations with great interest. I believe we have common ground." "I doubt that," Minji replied carefully, "unless you're offering to return my son." "I cannot do that. But I can offer something else. A way to end the corruption that has infected my empire." Hayon explained that a significant portion of the Vorthan military was disgusted by the slave trade. Many officers had joined the fleet to defend their people, not to support criminals who preyed on children. "The noble houses that buy human slaves are the same ones who have weakened our empire with their greed and corruption," she said. "If you can help us remove them from power, we can help you rescue your people." The alliance was unprecedented. Humans and Vorthans working together to overthrow a government that had oppressed both species in different ways. The plan that emerged was ambitious beyond anything Minji had imagined. A coordinated revolution that would strike at multiple targets, simultaneously, supported by military units from both species. "This will be the largest rescue operation in galactic history," Dr. Seo said, as they reviewed the final plans. "If it succeeds, we could free tens of thousands of slaves across the Vorthan Empire." "And if it fails?" asked Deho. "Then we all die," Minji replied. "But our children will be free." The night before the operation, Minji sat alone in her quarters holding the torn piece of Jinwoo's shirt that she had carried for 8 months. Tomorrow, she would either hold her son again or die trying. She activated her personal log for what might be the last time. "This is Captain Minji Park, day 241. Tomorrow we attack Vorthan Prime. The child they took from me has become the symbol of something larger than any of us imagined. The human storm that began with one mother's grief has become a revolution that spans the galaxy." She paused, looking at the small piece of fabric in her hands. "I'm coming for you, Tiger Cub. Your mom is coming home." Outside her window, the stars seemed to pulse with the promise of battle. The final hunt was about to begin. The Battle of Vorthan Prime began at dawn on the anniversary of the New Busan raid. From her position on the Bridge of the Liberation, Minji watched as hundreds of ships dropped out of hyperspace around the heavily defended world. Human rescue, vessels, Centauri destroyers, Melkrid cargo ships converted into troop transports, and most surprisingly, a full squadron of Vorthan military cruisers flying rebel flags. "All units, this is Captain Park," she broadcast to the massive fleet. "Today we end this. Today we bring our children home." The orbital defenses of Vorthan Prime were formidable, but they had been designed to repel invasion, not revolution. Admiral Hayon's ships provided access codes that disabled key defensive systems, while human stealth vessels slipped through the gaps to target command centers. The battle was fierce, but brief. Within 3 hours, the orbital platforms were either destroyed or under rebel control. Landing craft began descending toward the planet's surface like a metal rain. Minji led the assault on the Imperial Palace personally. Her strike team included Deho, Yeren, and a dozen other parents whose children were imprisoned somewhere in the massive complex. They fought their way through corridors filled with priceless art and luxury that had been bought with the suffering of slaves. "Palace security is collapsing," reported Kyung-jun over the comm. "The household slaves are turning on their masters. We've secured the main detention levels." But Minji wasn't interested in the common holding areas. Intelligence had pinpointed Jinwoo's location in the private quarters of Lord Vectar, high in the palace's central tower. The journey to the tower took them through halls where terrified Vorthon nobles cowered behind their guards. Some tried to fight. Others attempted to negotiate. Minji ignored them all. She had come for one thing only. The tower's security was different from the rest of the palace, more personal. These weren't soldiers, but household staff trained to protect their master's most precious possessions. Minji found Lord Vectar in his private dining hall, a lavish room overlooking the burning city below. He was an elderly Vorthon with silver-scaled skin and the elaborate robes of high nobility. Serving him dinner was a small human boy in simple servant's clothing. Jinwoo had grown in the 8 months since she had last seen him. He was taller, thinner, and moved with the careful precision of someone trained to anticipate his master's needs. But it was unmistakably her son. "Keth Miran," Lord Vectar said calmly, not looking up from his meal. "Pour the wine for our guests." The boy moved, immediately to obey, his movements automatic and practiced. He didn't look at Minji or the armed humans who had burst into the room. To him, they were just more masters to be served. "Hello, Jinwoo," Minji said softly, removing her helmet. The boy paused, the wine decanter halfway to the noble's cup. Something flickered in his eyes, confusion mixed with the emotion he couldn't identify. "My name is Keth Miran," he said carefully. "I serve Lord Vectar." The words were like knives in Minji's heart. Her son, her tiger cub, had been trained to deny his own identity. "Your name is Jinwoo Park," she said, taking a step closer. "You're 8 years old. Your favorite color is blue. You wanted to go fishing at Mirror Lake." The boy's hands began to shake. The conditioning was fighting against buried memories that refused to stay buried. I don't," he whispered. Lord Vectar finally looked up from his meal, his pale eyes amused. "How touching. The human female has come for her offspring. Keth Miran, kill these intruders." Minji's blood went cold as she watched her son reach for the ceremonial knife at the noble's side. The conditioning had included combat training. They had turned her child into a weapon against his own people. But as Jinwoo's hand closed around the knife handle, he stopped. Tears were streaming down his face as conflicting programming warred in his young mind. "Mom," he whispered, the word barely audible. The single word broke something inside Minji. She dropped her weapon and knelt down, opening her arms. "Yes, tiger cub. It's me. I came to bring you home." Jinwoo dropped the knife and ran to her. The embrace that followed was worth 8 months of war, thousands of battles, and every risk she had taken. Her son was alive, and despite everything they had done to him, he remembered who he was. "I tried to remember," he sobbed against her shoulder. "They said you were dead, but I tried to remember your face. I never stopped looking for you." Minji whispered back. "I never stopped hunting." Lord Vectar rose from his chair, reaching for a personal weapon. "Touching. But the boy is my property, legally purchased and properly trained. You have no right." The pulse blast took him in the chest before he could finish the sentence. Daeho lowered his weapon with a grim smile. "Legal purchase of children," he said. "That's a new one." The evacuation from Vorthon Prime took 3 days. Thousands of human slaves were loaded onto transport ships and medical vessels. Many, like Jinwoo, needed extensive psychological support to overcome years of conditioning and abuse. Dr. Miran Seo worked around the clock with trauma specialists from multiple species to help the recovered victims adjust to freedom. The process would take months, possibly years, but every freed slave was proof that the revolution had succeeded. The Vorthon Provisional Government has agreed to full reparations, Admiral Heun reported as the last transport ships departed. The noble houses that participated in the slave trade will have their assets seized and distributed to victim support programs. But Minji was barely listening to the political discussions. She sat in the medical bay with Jinwoo, watching him sleep peacefully for the first time in 8 months. The nightmares would come, she knew. The recovery would be long and difficult. But he was alive, and he was free. "Captain," said a young communication officer, "we're receiving reports from across the galaxy. Slave revolts on dozens of worlds. The Keth Dominion is requesting a ceasefire. The Flesh Merchants organization has collapsed completely." Minji nodded, but didn't look away from her son. The larger war would continue. There were still humans. In chains, still children separated from their families. But for now, she had what she had been hunting for. 2 years later, Minji stood on the observation deck of New Busan Station, watching her son practice flying maneuvers in a training shuttle. The colony had been rebuilt stronger than before, with defensive systems that no raider would ever penetrate again. Jinwoo had recovered remarkably well, though he still sometimes woke up speaking Vorthen phrases from his time in captivity. Dr. SEO said the linguistic conditioning would fade with time. What mattered was that he smiled again, laughed again, and called her mom without hesitation. "You know," he said over the comm from his shuttle, "I think I'm ready for that fishing trip you promised." Minji smiled. "Mirror Lake is still there, Tiger Cub. We'll go this weekend." The Tiger's Den, as they called the rehabilitation center she had established, housed over 3,000 recovered victims, former slaves who had become teachers, counselors, and advocates for others still trapped in the darkness between stars. The hunt that had begun with one mother's grief had become something larger than anyone had imagined. A network of rescue operations that spanned the galaxy, supported by governments and species that had learned the true cost of allowing slavery to exist in civilized space. As Minji watched her son's shuttle perform a perfect landing, she thought about the oath she had made in the ruins of his school so long ago. They had taken her tiger cub, and she had hunted worlds to bring him home. But in the end, she had done more than that. She had taught the galaxy that humans would never stop fighting for their young, and that some hunts end only when justice is served. The tiger cub had grown up to become a tiger, and tigers protect their family.